How can we make the world better? By making ourselves better. The Dr. Joe Show explores how you can make positive personal change by using his groundbreaking and highly effective I Am approach to understand who we are and why we do what we do. Your small changes can have big effects.
Join us now for the Dr. Joe Show with Mark Stiles of Stiles Law and your host, Dr. Joe Schrand.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and friends beyond the binary, welcome to the Dr. Joe Show.
Tom, that was so great. That was so great. Our previous guest will be really pleased that we're changing the opening format, as we should be. You know, that was a really important show that we did a few nights ago. So a week ago.
This was, yeah, but I believe it was 2 weeks ago. But it feels like yesterday because it's just getting more and more topical.
It is. But I appreciate that, and great introduction. How's your week been? My
week has been not bad at all, Dr. Joe. I've been enjoying the warm, if rainy weather. I actually love it when it's rainy and 60. You know, I feel it's bracing. I feel like a pirate. I don't know.
It's so funny you say that because I love it when it's any weather in my 60s. Because it's sorry. Yeah.
Speaking of pirate and weather, I'm excited because I'm heading to Puerto Rico next Tuesday. San Juan from the actually I'm not going to give the dates away. I don't want to get ambushed, but I haven't seen a palm tree in about 5 years, and I'm very excited to just point and look. There it is.
That's so great. It's going to be lovely for you. Well deserved vacation. It really is. But it does remind me, did you know that it costs $3 for a slice of pie in Jamaica and $2 for a slice of pie in the Dominican? Yeah, those are the pie rates of the Caribbean. Thank you. Okay, so actually we are talking about some serious stuff tonight. This is a global, we really are in the midst of this crazy global crisis. I mean, we've got all this tension here in the United States and this huge division between groups. And now there's a war going on where, go on.
Well, it's a lot of us are eating humble pie because for a month up to it, I was laughing it off. Like, oh yeah, isn't this a story every year where, you know, Putin's, you know, doing a saber rattling. And it's like, yeah, well, yeah, they're just going to egg it on, you know, because Putin is not a man I have closely studied, but I never envisioned him to be irrational.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very irrational action, it seems.
It sure seems that way. It sure seems limbic, and yet there may be something prefrontal and contrived about it. I don't know. I'm not an expert in war, but we are really lucky to have an expert, somebody who's been there, who's served our country. So Tom, can you introduce our guest for tonight, please?
I would love to, Dr. Joe. So, longtime friend of the show, graduate of Stella Adler Studio, friend of Brendan Mulhern. Dr. Joe, that's your son-in-law.
Yes, it is.
And Army veteran who has seen tours of duty in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and is now a professional actor in New York City. Welcome back, Patrick Troy-Brandt.
Thank you.
Yay, Patrick.
Thank you for the intro, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm just wondering how are you doing as progress here?
Yeah. Well, you know, I will say the same way I've been answering that question for a long time now. I think considering everything that literally every person on the planet is going through right now, tougher than normal times, I guess. I consider myself blessed, you know, and I think I'm doing pretty well here in Brooklyn with my wife and my little black cat.
It's a very dark time in the world right now. And you know, folks know that I just released my latest book, Unleashing the Power of Respect, the I Am Approach. And I'm really worried about what's going on in the world. because there is enormous disrespect, there's enormous anger, there's fear, and I worry that it will turn into depression and people will just shut down and be indifferent and say there's nothing we can do. But I am really curious, Patrick, from your point of view, maybe you could just refresh for some of our listeners a little bit about your history and story. And
Sure. Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, and I did just want on that point of, I certainly appreciate being called an expert, and I would say, yeah, maybe, and there are a lot of aspects that I'm very well versed and educated in on the aspect of war and going through war and combat and whatnot. But I do also want to stress that every situation is very unique, and every every crisis, war, everything is very unique to the individuals that experience it, and that's part of what I want to kind of get deeper into with y'all tonight. But yeah, so to start with, I started my Army career in 2004 after graduating from high school. Left for basic training 3 weeks after graduating. I enlisted in the Army as an airborne infantryman. So went through Army basic training, infantry school, and airborne school, and graduated from all that in 2004 November, and I was stationed at Fort Bragg with the 82nd Airborne Division. So that was November 2004. In February 2005, I was off to my first deployment to Afghanistan. Spent 13 months in Afghanistan. Came back to the United States for a year, then went over to Iraq for the first time for a year, back to the States for a year, back again to Iraq for another year, and then I got out. I was, like I said, airborne infantry. I rose to the rank of sergeant before I left, and I guess that's about the glossing over of it. Yeah.
What is the airborne infantry?
Yeah, so paratroopers, airborne infantry means that we are the guys who jump out of planes and parachutes, made very famous in World War II. The Band of Brothers series is all about the first American paratroopers. So anyway, the idea is that your infantry people, your foot soldiers who jump out of the plane in order to quickly secure enemy territory or occupied territory. Now, with that said, that is an asset that we had, a capability that we trained for a lot. I did a lot of training jumps, but I never jumped into combat because it was never really necessary with the type of operations that we were doing. I was on trucks, Humvees, or marching around on our feet for it. So, yeah.
I think that's a blessing, really, in a way that you didn't have to put yourself at that risk. It must be quite an experience jumping out of a plane, even in the best of times, and then into a war. Like, whoa.
Yeah, well, not to digress, I guess, too much into it, but I will say with the mindset that I had at the time, being a, 18, 19, 20-year-old, testosterone-driven kid, you kind of want, it's kind of a rite of passage to jump, to have a combat jump. So, you kind of have this feeling if you're in the airborne and you're doing the stuff anyway, you might as well get the full glory of it and get the mustard stain, what they call it. And that's a little gold star in the middle of your parachutist badge. That's what they call your little mustard stain if you made a combat jump, which very few of us have. But that, yeah. So, it all falls into the, I have to say, toxic masculinity of, training for a very deadly sport.
Deadly sport.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tom, what do you think of that phrasing, a deadly sport?
Well, I think it's appropriate. I I do think, Patrick, you've made the deliberate choice of words, kids. That's the draw for a lot of people enlisting, is that the promise of the adrenaline rush.
We're seeing that right now with the call to arms in in Ukraine. We see that in all these foreign engagements, foreign fighters, and Americans wanting to, take the plane trip, all the cost and the investment to get themselves over into a battle, when just purely logistically, you could take all of that money and fully support European foreign fighters that are a lot closer to the engagement and maybe have a lot more at stake, instead of yielding to your own sense of adventurism, maybe to go and see what war is all about.
I mean, this is really the I am of war. I mean, I think, the I am is saying we're always doing the best we can, but this, how do we wrap our head around this, even though it's war? So we were off air, we were talking a little bit about your understanding of the history of Ukraine and comparing Russian versus American army. Where would you like to start?
Well, I want to maybe start by saying, so I am, I'm passionate about a lot of aspects that revolve around Ukraine right now and the conflict, but I think I want to start by saying we are seeing unprecedented misinformation circulating around this conflict on both sides, on pro-Russian side, on pro-Ukrainian side, pro-Western forces side. So when you invited me to talk about this situation tonight, I really wanted to make a point to not get on any sort of personal platform here on my beliefs of what's going on, but I really want to try and give some just maybe objective information out for people who are trying to follow along, but you switch to one news source, it says one thing, another said another, everyone's saying everything else on Facebook. So maybe just starting with a baseline understanding of the broad history of Ukraine and the general territory. And I think the first thing to understand about Ukraine is it's known as the breadbasket of Europe, right? So it is an extremely fertile land that yields agriculturally a gross, overt amount that is very sought after by basically any large force that has happened upon it throughout history. So where does the Russian connection come in? Well, that actually comes in from Norse people, Scandinavians, known as Rus. We might associate them with Vikings. That's kind of a very specific term, Viking, but it is these Viking people that sort of migrated from the Scandinavians area in around the 9th century and found this very fertile land and started intermingling with the people that were already there. So that's sort of the first example that you have of a large hegemonic force coming in and mixing their culture in with the local culture and sort of taking over. Next instance of that you have is the Golden Horde, which is the Mongolian takeover of Asia and most of Europe, a lot of Europe in the 13th through 16th century. So you have these Mongolians coming into to Ukraine, the Ukrainian region, as it's sort of colloquially known, and so their culture gets imposed on these people now. And later on down, you have the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They come in about 300 years later, after the Mongols have sort of collapsed their empire. That's another power vacuum that's left in this very fertile breadbasket for the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And the most important thing about the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is this is where you're getting the quote unquote Western European influence in the region, okay? As this is happening, what will become the Russians, they're now in Moscow right now, and they're just they're the Rus people at this point. And Moscow is still very much influenced by Mongolian culture. So this is the 17th century, 16th, 17th century is when you're first seeing this divide and this clashing of what we known as Western and Eastern European influence, right? And that's just the beginning, then now going into later on, you have the Cossack culture, which maybe a lot of people are familiar with that term, but don't quite know what it is. And Cossack culture, it can parallel what we understand about Vikings, in that a Viking was a very specific job, if you will. It was someone who went out and raided and sought land. It wasn't everyone,
It's more like a verb, right?
Yes, right. To go Viking, yeah, exactly. So Cossacks was originally from a term for free people, bandits, people that live in these ungovernable territory. That's the Ukrainian territory. They have this history of autonomy, and they have this history of people coming in and trying to force their government systems on them, and them bucking against that. It's the birthplace of modern anarchy, which comes a little later. So these Cossack people, the Cossacks later on into the 19th and 20th century, they get divided. Some of them go to support Imperial Russia. Some of them go to support the Bolshevik that will come to be the communists. Oh God! So look, and maybe something that is becoming evident is how very complicated and intertwined not too distant politics are in this region. And this all feeds into World War II. And in World War II, you have these two powers. You have fascism and communism, both vying for the people and the land of Ukraine. And you have instances, like many other places in World War II, where people that were suffering under a current invading force looked for another power to help them. And in some situations, that power was a fascist power. It happened throughout Europe. And I think that we need to be careful about judging the type of collaborations, that the type of deals that people made literally when their backs are against the wall. And I mean this on both sides of the house. And I think this is another very important thing that leads into the IM regarding the Ukraine, regarding you have one side saying, well, it's full of Nazis, and you have another side saying, well, communists are invading. And I think the answer to both of those are yes and no. There are extremist forces that have been able to take hold in Ukraine because people have had to turn to them out of desperation for defense.
Azov Battalion. Right?
Yeah, that's a very famous example. Yeah.
Which example is that?
So from what I know is that there was a ultranationalist militia group called Azov Battalion that has been formally inducted into the Ukrainian military.
Yes. And yeah, that is true. And they are often pointed to as an example of making a general statement about Ukraine being a right-wing nationalist fascist government and country and nation. With the Azov Battalion, that's, again, this is something that I am hesitant to go down too deep in before I start saying things that I don't know are misinformation or information. But you definitely do have people out there arguing that they were brought into the fold of government supervision for that reason, to say, basically, so they could, people could sort of keep an eye on what they were doing, instead of them being this rogue force. That's an argument. I can't say.
So let me try to understand and clarify this. So the bread basket, I mean, the fact that it's a bread basket in and of itself is a very appealing resource to have. That's a huge value. And so other groups would want to take that, or at least have access to it, or, if it's not being shared, then they're going to take it and do something with it. So, and the Ukraine has sort of been in this position for 1,000 years. Sounds like
Yeah.
it's the Vikings, and then the Mongols, and then the Cossacks. And so is the Ukraine, and then was Ukraine part of the Soviet Union at some point?
Yes, they were.
Right.
Yep.
And so the Soviet Union at that point was a collection of countries. And then my understanding is that under, I think it was Reagan and Gorbachev, it collapsed. The Soviet Union collapsed, and then it was Russia, and then all the states, if you will, became their own independent country.
Yes.
And
Right.
just geographically, my understanding is that the Ukraine borders directly on Russia.
Right.
And so does that, do you think, from your experience in the military, would that then create either a target or a concern or a tension, depending on the relationship between these two countries, if they're bordering each other?
Sort of
One
turned into a tug of war, though, hasn't it?
Well, it's I think it's fair, maybe a little more accurate to say it's an identity crisis.
Okay.
Because basically, so maybe this would be a good time to transition to more to talking about Putin.
Yes. Okay.
So I want to preface this by saying that a lot of this information that I have someone who's close to me who was in the CIA, career CIA agent, served in Russia in the 90s, went on later to become a station chief in Europe and retire. And he actually had dinner with Putin back in the day, back when Putin was working for Russian intelligence. And the CIA person, they majored in Russian. Their specialty was Russian history, and so that's sort of, so the bead that they have on Putin is basically, he's been planning this for over 20 years. Anyone that is in the intelligence community that has been monitoring this situation saw this as an inevitability, that Russia was going to invade Ukraine, because Russians, Putin among them, believe that Ukraine is part of Russia, and that it was separated as a device to break the power, of Eastern Europe in favor of Western Europe. And Ukraine is edging closer and closer towards European Union, to joining them, which one major thing that Putin fears out of that is a cultural revolution within Ukraine. That's one of the main concerns, that they will become culturally more like the West than the East, and just provide, add to that downfall. He basically, what this landed in is a failed intel on Putin's part. That's why Ukraine became such a mess, because it was his idea to invade and 48 hours later have a whole lockdown of the entire country. And that's what everyone else thought was going to happen, because Russian army relies heavily on the railroad system. And because Ukraine borders Russia, they are covered in borders with railroad tracks. And so, yeah, the whole neighbor, right, that was a major part.
I want to come back to this idea that you raised at the end, that people thought it was just going to be done, that the Russians would come in, and because they're huge compared to Ukraine. I mean, they're massive. And the expectation, this horrible expectation, was that this was just going to be done. They were just going to come and take a country.
Mission accomplished.
Right.
So first of all, why would people think that? And then we can get into hopefully comparing strategies or the army or.
Well, I think that it's, well, especially us in the West, it's sort of what we're used to seeing, ever since like Desert Storm. I mean, anytime a large force has gone in to, you know, take care of whatever they're going to take care of in a much smaller force. You know, we're used to modern technology and planes and drones and tanks, and we just conceive of this, you know, this blitzkrieg developed by the Nazis, this lightning war, and that's, I think, just kind of what we're used to. But it was I'm going to paraphrase this quote because I wasn't prepared to say it, but General Pershing, who was the general of the army in World War I, said something along the lines of, infantry wins battles, logistics wins wars. So this is really the key difference here. This is the logistics of the Russian army is really the crux of why we're in the situation we're in. That and the civilian reaction of Ukraine to the Russian invasion, which essentially Putin believed that he was going to be seen as a liberator to most of the country, that people were going to come in here, you know, with hugging the soldiers and helping them out. And, you know, I think anyone who has seen any 5 minutes of the war has seen that's very much not the case, that he has met staunch resistance on the civilian front, which I can definitely speak from experience that in modern warfare, when your objective is not to just clear a city block of all life and roll through, a big army will be slowed to a crawl with civilian resistance and insurgency. And one of the main things is that they're attacking the logistic supplies of the Russian army, you know. So the way the Russian army is set up, though, is, so with them, they regiment their supply chain. All right, I'm going to try to see if I can.
So what does that mean, to regiment the supply
Right.
chain?
So what that means, basically, so for the higher ups, right, the officers back in Moscow or whatever, the guys in charge, they determine how a resupply is going to work during this operation. You know, say, for example, they're going to say, all right, in 3 days, you're going to be at this checkpoint. We're going to have 40 cases of fuel and 20 boxes of ammunition. Then at this checkpoint, 4 days later, you're going to get your food and your water. But this is, you know, I'm making this up for example,
Yeah.
But so that is logistics leading strategy. So then the lower down, the boots on the ground have to plan accordingly, and they have to meet these expectations of this whole timeline, or else everything starts falling apart. The way the American army works, it's different, because we have strategy leading logistics. We have the people planning the operations on the ground saying, well, we're going to need this, this, and this before we even set off. And then in 4 days, we're going to need this, this, and this, and this. And the higher ups, they adjust that maybe to budgeting or, you know, their own supply demands, but that is how the system works. So there's a lot more independent thought by the units moving about. That's one major thing. The logistics is huge.
So let's just stick with that for a minute. So how does that change the way an army basically works and functions? I mean, that sounds like a huge philosophical difference.
Well, and so what experts believe now is that essentially this invading force got loaded down with a lot of bullets and not a lot of fuel or food or anything to sustain. So basically, the Russian army works where an invading force basically has enough supply to last 3 to 4 days, maybe, because they're thinking they need more ammunition, more bullets to keep the drive going. So then they secure the area, and that's when you know they can bring in their, you know, support. It's not like Americans, we have a big technology advantage. We have, you know, technologically, like air superiority, navigation systems. Most of the Russian army is using paper maps right now. So we can get resupplied much more on an improvisational thing. But as soon as these guys get bogged down, as soon as they run out of fuel, what good is a tank? You know, as soon as you run out of food, what good is a soldier? so the machine just starts breaking down, and you have these resistance fighters purposely going after fuel trucks, and networking themselves to attack soft targets that really just grind the machine of war to a halt.
And do you think part of this was the sort of misconception of Putin, who thought, well, we're going to go in and the Ukrainians are going to say, great, we're really glad you're here, which means we don't need to have the resupply. We don't need to have these sort of logistics in place because it's only going to be 2 days.
Exactly. Yeah. His idea, he thought that the biggest thing he would have to do would get into Kiev and set up a puppet government as soon as he toppled the first one. And then the dominoes would start falling in line. And now it's seeming like there's being backed more into a corner, because not only are the people that were against Russia in the first place really getting angrier and angrier and less patient with Putin, but the oligarchs back in Russia that were supporting him are now kind of stamping their feet and looking at their watches and saying, what is the holdup and where are we going to go from here? Because these oligarchs are not, these aren't the Russian oligarchs that have, villas in Italy and all this. They are very centrally sort of invested in Russian culture and Russian assets and et cetera. But now this is, so they're kind of protected from sanctions, but now just the attrition of Ukraine right now is what's weighing on them and sort of, losing face by this becoming a big, cluster mess.
I mean, again, to bring the IM into this, it goes again and again and again that human beings just want to feel valued. I mean, this is who we are. And so when one person or country tries to increase their value by decreasing somebody else's, we shouldn't be surprised that the other person or country is going to respond in kind. No way, man. You're not going to take my value. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take yours. And that's been going on for so long. We keep doing it over and over. And I know there are a lot of people who are not listening to this who will say, well, they won't say anything because they're not listening. But that's the point. We need to be able to do something different. Here we are once again in this position where the same thing is going on. One country wants the breadbasket in this case of another, but it's more than the breadbasket, isn't it? It's the strategic position, because if Russia can take the Ukraine, it's a little closer to Europe. And is that the big plan? I mean, we don't know what the big plan is, but it's mind-boggling that here we are, 2022, and we're potentially on the brink of another world war.
If I could amend your saying about one country invading another, I think it's one handful of men invading another.
Okay.
Because I think it's very easy to fall into the team sport of this is Ukraine versus Russia. Russia bad, Ukraine good. The Russian people didn't ask for this.
Right.
And already we're punishing them. We're imposing sanctions which aren't going to hit the sanctions only ever kill the poor and vulnerable. I'm sorry, that's my soapbox statement, but we're cutting off Netflix. You joking?
Right.
What?
Right. The liquor stores throwing out Russian.
It's freedom
vodkas.
fries.
Yep. I I was just talking with Nina about that phenomenon post 9/11. Yeah, freedom fries. Yep.
I'm sorry. What's the freedom fries reference?
Oh, go ahead.
So when Bush was saying you're with us or against us, I forget whoever was French president at the time pretty much said that's dumb. You're done. And
right.
And so many American restaurants changed their menus from French fries to freedom fries.
Right. Right. No, I agree, Tom. I mean, it's not a country. It's maybe not even a tribe. It is one individual to the next, and yet um, individuals. I mean, this is part of what you started talking about, Patrick. I mean, depending on which news station you listen to, you're going to have a particular view and opinion, and that's why I'm trying to get people to think about the I am for a moment, because it takes us and generalizes, no army pun intended there, but basically saying we are one group. We really all want the same thing. So why do we have to keep taking from one person to get what we want? The I am is saying, whenever you remind someone of their value, you increase your own value. And part of that is because then everyone is safer. Then we can keep it frontal and not go limbic. We don't have to activate that fight, flight, freeze response. Respect leads to value, and value leads to trust. And it is that trust that we need to be able to have the discussions about our differences. Well, how can this be the best someone can do? Remember, because the I am is saying we're always at our current maximum potential, but if we don't like it, we can change it. And this is something we need to change at a global level.
This is also like an opportunity for people to realize that this is happening in a lot of places.
Yes.
And it was a bit of it's very disappointing seeing so many people just completely out themselves, saying this is the first major war between civilized nations.
Yes, there's a lot of I would say people telling on themselves, rushing to aid one country.
Wait, was that a pun?
Was it?
Rushing
it is,
to aid?
Sorry. Well, it is now.
But you were saying, but it's true. They're all this aid is coming. I mean, people say, well, it's because they're white. So let's God, it's crazy.
And
Yemen.
We are bombing Yemen. We are starving Afghanistan. We are condemning Palestine. But we have very hard opinions on Ukraine and very definite opinions on Ukraine.
So it's illuminating something for us, right? And that is, I guess, our bias, not just our perspective. Early on in the show, Patrick, you said something about every experience is unique, talking about war, I think. And could you talk more about that?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I was thinking a lot about these Russian soldiers that are going in, that are actively invading Ukraine now, and how I can't 100% confirm that all these stories are true, but Russian soldiers, we have videos of them surrendering to Ukrainian mothers and grandmothers who feed them and give them tea, and these soldiers claiming that they had no idea what they were involved with. They thought, some of them thought they were liberating, some of them thought this was, training. There are conscripts within the Russian army, drafted soldiers. And I get, I don't know. I just, very much, I think, to what you were talking about, Thomas, just us generalizing one uniformed military as each one of these soldiers, are the ardent, diehard Putin loyalists that we think they all are, and just what people will do when they're don't think they have any other option, that that people will pick up a gun and fight for a cause, for all sorts of reasons, for why they need to survive. I don't know. I guess I just get overwhelmed trying to break down that idea, but just the people can find themselves in a situation for any number of reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you're bringing it down to this personal level. I mean, it must be terrifying to be a soldier, to be, potentially killed, and that's what people are putting you in. They're putting you in that position. You go in and you either kill someone or you be killed. Am I way too simplistic with this, Patrick?
Nope. I mean, I think, yeah, I think it's overwhelming in its simplicity. That nothing else matters. You realize all of a sudden nothing else matters except for the next 30 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever. And also, most of the rest of the world does not view their soldiers with the same amount of patriotic support as Americans do. I think that's another thing that Americans don't understand. Like a lot of, in Russia and in a lot of our neighboring countries, UK, joining the military is kind of, you didn't have any other option, and people are like, why would you, do that unless you were facing jail time? And that's kind of the point, is to have undesirables that are expendable, in your armed forces. So if the bodies start counting up, people don't really mind too much.
Well, some people must, right? Some people must mind the person who's waiting at home to find out whether their son or daughter or independent.
Not the voices that are heard, I guess.
No. The other thing is, I'm just thinking what this must be like for a soldier, where their life is on the line, their brain is going to be producing all this cortisol, and their adrenaline, and those things block other chemicals. We know that cortisol blocks dopamine, which is a chemical of pleasure, and cortisol blocks oxytocin, which is the chemical of trust. So under these stress conditions, which we are under globally now, it's very hard to feel pleasure. And who do you trust? And I wonder whether this is part of what we're also looking at with Ukraine, but also with the division we have here in the United States. With COVID was a common enemy. Somehow tribes need a common enemy. We could have made COVID that common enemy. Unfortunately, we still need a common enemy, but we could have made COVID that, and come together as a global community to say, we're being invaded by this incredibly small thing that kills people. What do we do as a community to come together around that? But that opportunity may have been missed. So we're coming to the end of the show. The IM approach, as you know, has two truths. The four domains: the home, the social, the biological, and the I see, how I see myself, how I think other people see me, interact. Because of these interactions, a small change can have a big effect. So Patrick, what small change can you recommend to our listeners so that we can manage this?
Well, I think I'll go back to the thing I said the first time I was on here, which is I would encourage people to actively listen with an intent to change their perspective.
Yeah, I hope people are doing that. And I hope people who are listening to this show will share it with other people, who will then share it with others, so that we can all change our perspective and realize how much we have in common right now. We have so much at risk, and yet so much opportunity to do something to bring ourselves together. The second truth of the I am, everyone's got an I am. Everyone is interested through their IC domain in what you think or feel about them, which has an effect on their biological domain, because you know it feels differently when you feel respected or disrespected. You're part of someone's home or social domain, which means you control no one, you influence everyone, you get to choose the kind of influence you want to be. Patrick Troy-Brandt, what kind of influence do you want to be?
I want to be a pillar of support for anyone around me who needs it.
Yeah. And I sure hope that that becomes a model for everyone. Everyone. You know, we're under a lot of stress globally. But one of the best ways to reduce your stress is to help reduce somebody else's stress. Because as soon as you do that, you increase your value and you remind them of theirs, which is what we want. And as soon as you remind someone of their value, it increases oxytocin, it decreases cortisol, and you begin to trust you're safer. We can create a safer world by simply wondering why people do what they do and approaching them in a way with respect that leads to value. And then they can trust you with their perspective. And then we can have a discussion. We can have a discussion, even though I don't agree with someone. Doesn't mean I don't respect them. So, Patrick, thank you so much for coming on. Again, you are one of our repeat guests, and we really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for that and for everything you've done for us.
Thank you, Dr. Joe.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night, Tom.
Night, night.
Dear Romeo, dragged from the vial, did he do it for love or was he just being wild? Who